The Internal Revenue Service is the revenue service of the United States federal government, which is responsible for collecting taxes and administering the Internal Revenue Code, the main body of the federal statutory tax law. It is part of the Department of the Treasury and led by the Commissioner of Internal Revenue, who is appointed to a 5-year term by the President of the United States. The duties of the IRS include providing tax assistance to taxpayers, pursuing and resolving instances of erroneous or fraudulent tax filings, and overseeing various benefits programs, including the Affordable Care Act. The IRS originates from the Commissioner of Internal Revenue, a federal office created in 1862 to assess the nation's first income tax to fund the American Civil War. The temporary measure provided over a fifth of the Union's war expenses before being allowed to expire a decade later. In 1913, the 16th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution was ratified, authorizing Congress to impose a tax on income, and the Bureau of Internal Revenue was established. In 1953, the agency was renamed the Internal Revenue Service, and in subsequent decades underwent numerous reforms and reorganizations, most significantly in the 1990s. Since its establishment, the IRS has been responsible for collecting most of the revenue needed to fund the federal government, albeit while facing periodic controversy and opposition over its methods, constitutionality, and the principle of taxation generally. In recent years, the agency has struggled with budget cuts and reduced morale. As of 2018, it saw a 15% reduction in its workforce, including a decline of more than 25% of its enforcement staff. Nevertheless, during the 2017 fiscal year, the agency processed more than 245 million returns and collected more than $3.4 trillion in gross revenue, spending $34 for every $100 it collected. In July 1862, during the American Civil War, President Abraham Lincoln and Congress passed the Revenue Act of 1862, creating the Office of Commissioner of Internal Revenue and enacting a temporary income tax to pay war expenses. The Revenue Act of 1862 was passed as an emergency and temporary wartime tax. It copied a relatively new British system of income taxation, instead of trade and property taxation. The first income tax was passed in 1862. By the end of the war, 10% of Union households had paid some form of income tax, and the Union raised 21% of its war revenue through income taxes. After the Civil War, Reconstruction, railroads, and transforming the North and South war machines towards peacetime required public funding. However, in 1872, 7 years after the war, lawmakers allowed the temporary Civil War income tax to expire. Income taxes evolved, but in 1894 the Supreme Court declared the income tax of 1894 unconstitutional in Pollock v. Farmers Loan and Trust Co., a decision that contradicted Hilton v. United States. The federal government scrambled to raise money. In 1906, with the election of President Theodore Roosevelt, and later his successor William Howard Taft, the United States saw a populist movement for tax reform. This movement culminated during then-candidate Woodrow Wilson's election of 1912 and in February 1913, the ratification of the 16th Amendment to the United States Constitution. The Congress shall have power to lay and collect taxes on incomes from whatever source derived, without apportionment among the several states, and without regard to any census or enumeration. This granted Congress the specific power to impose an income tax without regard to apportionment among the states by population. By February 1913, 36 states had ratified the change to the Constitution. It was further ratified by 6 more states by March. Of the 48 states at the time, 42 ratified it. Connecticut, Rhode Island, and Utah rejected the amendment. Pennsylvania, Virginia, and Florida did not take up the issue, though the constitutional amendment to allow the federal government to collect income taxes was proposed by President Taft in 1909. The 16th Amendment was not ratified until 1913, just before the start of the First World War. In 1913, the first edition of the 1040 form was introduced. A copy of the very first IRS 1040 form can be found at the IRS website, showing that only those with annual incomes of at least $3,000 were instructed to file the income tax return. In the first year after ratification of the 16th Amendment, no taxes were collected. Instead, taxpayers simply completed the form and the IRS checked the form for accuracy. The IRS's workload jumped by tenfold, triggering a massive restructuring. Professional tax collectors began to replace a system of patronage appointments. The IRS doubled its staff, but was still processing 1917 returns in 1919. Income tax raised much of the money required to finance the war effort. In 1918, a new Revenue Act established a top tax rate of 77%. In 1919, the IRS was tasked with